You're watching Zoo Tours, the channel that takes you on a virtual field trip to the zoo. On this episode of Zoo Tours, I, as an Ohio resident, am standing up to the anti-Ohio memes to show you that there really are things to do in this state. No, really, there are tons of things to do. I don't get them. You know, I can only help my case with zoos, so I'm going to show that you can find some of the world's cutest animals at the Cleveland Metroparks Zoo's Australian Adventure. Before you go and say, oh great, another Australian adventure. No. Believe me, unlike its name, this attraction and this tour will not be a repeat of anything else. There are a bunch of unexpected animals that are new to the channel, and a couple of other surprises that'll not only make you smile, but will probably even make you laugh. Before we hop on in, and yes, I'll use that joke 100 more times if I have to, let's get your comments going with this question of the episode. What is your all-time favorite Australian attraction and why? The zoo brought nearly 8 acres of the Australian wilds to Cleveland in the year 2000. Though it's not the main entrance, I like to start by the Elephant Crossing's Savannah side. That way the best is saved for last. The first lives in a long paddock, and it's something that you probably wouldn't expect to see in an Australian area. The miniature horse. What? Australia can't have domestic animals either? Because I'll admit that was my first thought. But there actually is a pretty good reason why they're exhibited here, and it has to do with the area's theme. But for now, we'll say bye-bye, little Sebastian. Take a break from the domestic to look at something that you might think is domestic. And it only took me 10 summers to get a good look at them. The Dingoes. A dog that's been pretty hard to classify. Some believe that they're an ancient breed of domestic dog introduced to Australia between 4,000 to 8,000 years ago, and eventually stopped being man's best friend to become truly wild. The timeline is true, but there are recent genetic studies that actually question that theory. They suggest that the Australian dingo evolved from a wild dog and may have never actually been domesticated in the past. There is speculation that their biggest threat is the domestic dog, which are able to breed with this wild dog and thus depleting the pure dingo population. But another recent study found that dingo dog hybrids are actually fairly rare and does challenge the once famous idea that pure Australian dingoes are nearly extinct. Sitting across from Brumby and Elsie is a smaller pen that I'm pretty sure was once the camel ride station, but it now holds the next best thing, alpacas. This is connected to the Kookaburra barn. It might lack the laughing bird, but I still always love to visit. It's probably decorated like your grandpa's garage, but rather than smelling like motor oil, it smells of goats, sheep, and miniature donkeys. In true zoo livestock fashion, this is also connected to a contact yard or petting zoo. And like I said, this section is all part of a theme. It ties into the nearby Reinberger homestead, a fully furnished 19th century Victorian sheep station, which offers not just a peek at Australian home life, but when you combine it with the livestock, the entire property is supposed to be a ranch. Unfortunately, the homeowners did not care to take visitors in on our trip to the zoo. Before you move on from that, you can head to the back corner, where you might say hello to a barn owl, which yes, is also found in Australia. At least on this side of the pond, they're not exactly considered a staple Australian species, but this area still does have those. And this thing is a comedy combo of a sulfur-crested cockatoo and a laughing kookaburra. The next feature I've heard is an absolute must-experience attraction. The Yaga Tree is a 55-foot tall replica of a baobab tree, mainly built for the young or the young at heart. It's fit with suspending bridges, a coral snake-themed slide, and a dark cavern that was once home to a submerged animatronic crocodile that some of you might know as Woolly Bill. The Yaga Tree is a relic, but we did not get to experience it because it was also closed on our last visit. I know that's a little disappointing, but we're getting to the good stuff. If you were to step out of the Reinberger homestead's back porch, you'd meet the entrance of the acre-large, 400-foot-long, multi-exhibited wallaby walkabout. Though it's still quite the sight, There really isn't much going on the right side anymore. The guest path has a few termite mounds, a display that tells that Aboriginal people who were sick would often eat the soil from these mounds to make themselves feel better. Just don't try these ones out. I know how easy it is to be fascinated by termite mound trivia, but I'm pretty sure all of your attention will look towards the trail's left side. Now you'll notice that this isn't really a true walkabout, though I'm fairly certain that you used to be able to. You don't actually share the space with the animals. One of the easiest macropods to recognize are the Bennetts Wallabies. Compared to a kangaroo, they have much shorter stature and more compact legs to give them better movement through a forested habitat, versus a kangaroo's legs, which are built for more open terrain. Now they might be easy to recognize by their size, shape, and color, or maybe it's just because every other walkabout has them. Their roommates, however, I didn't even recognize. The Wallaroo. Wallaroo. Sounds like a combination of wallaby and kangaroo, but their name coincidentally originates from an Aboriginal word, wallaroo, and I learned a small lesson from this mob. They taught me to always pay close attention when you're watching marsupials, because you never know how many there actually are. It took me a second, but we finally noticed a joey. Wallaroos and other roos are able to give birth not only in any time of the year, but even right after giving birth, even if they still have a little one in the pouch. So essentially, they can delay the growth of an embryo, which won't start to develop until the previous joey is able to leave that pouch. As bad as we wanted to see that, it seems this flyer did everything she could to make sure she didn't have an empty nest. The walkabout's first section, within a section of an attraction, concludes and a new one begins. Still within the walkabout and across these tracks is a mob of red kangaroos, the largest marsupial in the world, and they too are constantly growing their numbers here in Cleveland, and they can only really be seen in the distance unless you ride the Aussie Safari, but we'll briefly get to that soon. Now, at this point, there's really no chance of a roo hopping a fence, joining you for a walk or a wrestling match, but there still is one more viewable habitat that contains western gray kangaroos. The Wallaby Walkabout then turns into the Koala Junction. The first thing you might see is the boomerang line that starts right next to the western grays, that passes through the entire walkabout, also brings you back to the ranch, gives a peek at the African elephant's private yard at the elephant crossing, and ends with a somewhat hidden exhibit for an emu. But unless it's Busch Gardens, unfortunately waiting in line for a train is not something I'll probably ever do. But I will wait in line for any walk-through aviary. The Outback Aviary is a quaint walk-in flight cage, fun for anyone who's not terrified of birds. If you are, you can still admire them from a distance from within this patio. What once contained lorikeets is now filled with crested pigeons and a lot of budgies. So it's not exactly an upgrade, but at least the color is still there. And hey, if it means not having another lorikeet landing, then that's fine with me. If you've kept up with the tour group this far, you are about to be rewarded. And you can find your prize at this building. They have access to the great outdoors, but I don't think I've ever seen them use this. But you'll never miss them in the Gumleaf Hideout. Two habitats that make up, objectively, the zoo's peak in terms of guest experience. You might have to fight your way to see their koalas. Oh, koalas. You can do absolutely nothing and still make people, well, make certain faces that I'm sure you're making right now. You all probably know that they can sleep up to 20 hours a day, and chances are that's what you're gonna see. Shoot, San Diego has 12 koala habitats, and I didn't get any movement. Cleveland's trio, on the other hand, had trouble staying still. I know, and we were in as much disbelief as you are. And it wasn't just their male Niombi, but Mackenzie and little Cohen too. Why they're so sleepy is for another time. The real question is, why so active? Well, they don't always sleep, so there's that. But koalas do look for a mate between August to February. This was filmed in July, but what happened next might prove that was the case. We heard his mating call. Obviously, that imitation of a modern pop star was enticing enough to produce a couple of Joeys in the last few years. Now, in the spirit of Save the Koala Month, the wild population has been on the decline over the past 2 decades. The IUCN lists the koala as vulnerable, but the Australian government considers and treats them as an endangered species. Their biggest threat is habitat loss, and without their trees, they're most likely to spend more time on the ground, which makes them vulnerable to wild dogs and vehicles. And the zoo kind of addresses this. To make sure that you're not too distracted by the cuteness, at the very end of the hideout is a light-up display that gives an idea, of their current and former range. So we don't end on a sad note. This hideout is actually shared with a brush-tailed rat kangaroo, allegedly, since I honestly doubt anyone's actually seen them. And finally, a Matchie's Tree Kangaroo, an endangered macropod from New Guinea, and the Australian Adventures' 7th and final marsupial. And that, Boomers and Flyers, completes another episode of Zoo Tours. Let me know what you think and if you learned something new. And if you didn't, well, at least you got your free admission's worth of cuteness. So as usual, please stay tuned. See if you can answer this episode's trivia question, and thank you all for watching.